Hello and welcome to Music with Mascots. Today I'm going to talk about a book, Three Shades of Blue, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, and the Lost Empire of Cool. If you only ever read one book about jazz, this is the one it should be. It came out last year, 2024. And it's brilliant, and it covers so much material, such a huge sweeping of people and events that lead up to the recording of Kind of Blue. There are two other books that are excellent, written by Ashley Kahn, A Love Supreme. This focuses on John Coltrane, gives a nice biography of him, and then talks about the album and the recording of A Love Supreme, which is one of the top jazz albums of all time. Also one of my favorites. He also wrote another book on Miles Davis and the recording of Kind of Blue. I just started reading this after finishing the other. I had read A Love Supreme before. And I'm enjoying it, but if you're only going to read one book and you want to cover the same material with a bunch more, this is the way to go. James Kaplan's book. Now, it's billed as a triple biography of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Bill Evans, three of the people that came together to create the album Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. It's also much broader because he goes back to the roots of the music that they were making. So you get quite a bit of background into the earlier jazz, into players like Dizzy Gillespie, Duke Ellington, as well as a host of contemporaries. This is also a book about addiction. It's about people who managed to break their addiction. It's also about people who didn't. The way they suffered, the way the people around them suffered, and the way it affected the music, because so many of them were junkies. You get pictures of some of the people who may be considered peripheral. You get a nice portrait of Cannonball Adderley, who is one of my favorites. You get portraits of Philly Joe Jones, of Thelonious Monk, but these are small pieces, and he focuses mainly there on the effect they had on the album and the group of people coming together to record that album. But with the other three, you get really excellent biographical treatment. You learn their histories, their musical tastes, how they developed, who they developed them from, how they learned, who they learned from. Of the three, Bill Evans was the only classically trained musician. Miles did kind of fake it going to Juilliard for a year, but he got fed up with white people's music. That's how he put it anyway. But he kept going back to it throughout the course of his life. He would study scores written by Stravinsky, written by Schoenberg, and other great contemporary classical composers who were white. So even though he voiced this prejudice, he didn't really fully have it, because he revered white musicians if they were great. So for him, it was really about how much talent they had and could they play the music he needed them to play. Bill Evans fit in perfectly on this album. He recorded all except for one of the pieces, Kind of Blue. 7 men who came together to make this record: Miles Davis, Cannonball Adderley, Paul Chambers, James Cobb, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, and Wynton Kelly. Wynton Kelly plays piano on one of the tracks that Bill Evans doesn't play on. Paul Chambers, outstanding bass player. James Cobb, drums and percussion. Of these, Coltrane was an addict. Evans was an addict. Miles Davis was an addict. Paul Chambers was an addict. I don't know about James Cobb or Wynton Kelly. I just picked up this vinyl edition, which has alternate takes, an alternate take of flamenco sketches, and it also has a recording of On Green Dolphin Street. It was originally released in 1959. That's when they all came together. By then, Miles was clean. By then, Coltrane was clean. Bill Evans was not. I don't believe Paul Chambers was. So they were together at this one moment in time, directed by Miles Davis. And Miles Davis is credited with all of the compositions. I know that that's justifiable because he writes out chord changes, he writes out specific parts, but a lot of the album is improvisational. These guys fit so well together at this moment of time that they could function as a real unit. They could do that. They could read each other. They could know what one person was going to do and what another person was going to do, and they could blend it all together for one moment of perfection. They all went on in music, continued their careers. And James Kaplan covers that in here. He covers Cannonball Adderley, he covers later recordings of Bill Evans, of John Coltrane, and especially of Miles. Miles lived the longest and had the longest career. I don't know why that is. Maybe his body was able to take what he put it through better than the bodies of the others. Although he stayed off heroin, he did take up cocaine, which was a habit he maintained for the rest of his life. His personal life was a mess. He brings that to his music. He brings all of his emotionality to his music, which is why it connects with so many people. John Coltrane is more of a spiritual individual. And that comes out in A Love Supreme, and it comes out in his work after that, and the type of person he was. He was a quieter, calmer person. He wasn't interested in the spotlight like Miles was. And Bill Evans was Bill Evans. Bill Evans was classically trained. He brought a whole lot to the table, but he wanted jazz, and he was good at it. The addiction did affect his work. It did affect the quality of his albums, and the quality would go up and down depending on where he was in his life and his addiction and who he could get to play with him at given times. One of the things that is great about modern times is many of us belong to a streaming service where we can listen to whatever we want for the $10 or $15 a month that we're paying, which is really nothing. When you're reading this book, have something nearby that hooks you to your streaming service, because you're going to hear about albums and performers, and you're going to want to listen to them. That's one of the joys of reading this book, is it's so much broader than the two by Ashley Kahn. Kahn talks mostly about recordings of the composer who's writing about, whereas James Kaplan gets a lot broader. You hear a lot more about the early work that they did. You'll hear about who Miles performed with early in his career, and you'll understand how he got to where he did musically. Coltrane also. And you'll hear and read about the drug addiction of the people around them, how it was part of the culture. For some people, it affected them more than others, and certainly for most people, it killed them directly or indirectly. Indirectly down the road from damage done to the body, even after the habit was kicked. But the ability to stream when you're reading about music is just amazing, because back in the day, before all these services were available, if I was reading a book like this and I wanted to hear an album, I would have to go buy it or find someone that had it and listen to it. And I might have time to visit a friend who might have an album and listen to a track or two. But I might not. The friend might not have any of the albums that are mentioned in here, but may have other stuff. And when streaming services came along, first there was Apple Music, and you would buy an album through Apple Music and then download it in iTunes and listen to it. But you're still purchasing it sight unseen or unlistened. Now you don't have to do that. Now you can listen to something, read the description of it, and then put the music on to hear what Kaplan is talking about when he's talking about the music, about the musicians. Also, there are a lot of live recordings that are coming out now that were not available before. So he might talk about a concert, and you can go listen to that concert. Maybe find it on YouTube. Maybe it's been released as an album. A lot of ways, a lot of sources available to us that just weren't there before. Take advantage of them. If you're watching me on YouTube, YouTube has tons of live concerts of jazz musicians that you can watch or listen to. A lot of fun to do that, especially the older concerts. Again, I give this a huge thumbs up. This is a 5 out of 5 if you're rating it. It's extremely well written. It draws you in and draws you along like a good novel. That is, if you're interested in jazz. The knowledge that he has, the breadth of knowledge that Kaplan has, is amazing, and he brings so much to the table. Kind of Blue by Ashley Kahn. This has something that is not in the other book that may interest you. He got to hear the original studio recordings, the complete original tapes, which is 2 days. It took 2 days to record this album. And the notes are available to him, and he puts them in here of the dialogue that's taking place between the players. And I can't imagine with Ashley Kahn's familiarity with the music and the players how he felt. He kind of describes the awe that he had listening to this and the enthusiasm, and he picks up on and conveys the emotions of the other people in the room. And that's something that's not treated as well by Kaplan, because he's relying on Ashley Kahn to derive that information from in a lot of places. Kaplan is using Kind of Blue as a focal point, that there are all these musicians leading to this one point. With A Love Supreme, this is about Coltrane's journey, and a lot of times Coltrane's spiritual journey, that leads to a point with the album A Love Supreme, which was released after Kind of Blue was. So he's had a chance to mature just by being part of Miles Davis's band at that time. He grows. So if you want a fuller treatment of A Love Supreme, this is a great book. If you want just to read about Kind of Blue, this is a great book. If you want it all, if you want a picture of all the people involved, from the recording studio to the agents, to the publishers, to the labels, this is the book. And if you can only choose one, you've only got time to read one book, it should be this one. If somehow you made it to this book review and have never heard Kind of Blue, you've certainly heard of it if you're at all interested in jazz. It's worth a listen. There are many people who consider it the best jazz album ever made. It's certainly up there. Is it the best ever made? Depends on who you're asking. I like A Love Supreme pretty much as I like Kind of Blue. I would not put one over the other. I would put both of them up there together. But there's so much jazz after and so much jazz before that if you're going to choose a best album, you really need to narrow your focus, because there are different styles of jazz, and this is modal jazz as opposed to earlier bebop and swing, and then free jazz came later. So this is kind of where everything came together for the beginning of modal jazz, which focuses on the modes, which are scales built off of the major scale, depending on where your tonic is. So if you move your tonic to 1 to 2, you go from major to Dorian. If you move from 2 to 3, and 3 is your tonic, it's the Phrygian mode, and so on and so on. So using those scales is very different from the tonality that you may be used to in Western music. Classical music was pushing on these boundaries for years in a very different way. Schoenberg's 12-tone music, for example, which Davis studied. He studied the scores of that music. And then Miles Davis moved on. He was done with this. He moved on. And Birth of the Cool was a trend-setting album. Kind of Blue was a trend-setting album. And then Bitches Brew, many people call that the birth of fusion. Fusion was coming together at that time with a number of musicians. It was not just Miles, but Bitches Brew is also one of the top albums and influential albums. So Miles Davis had a hand in 3 major changing points in jazz. That's astounding. That is really astounding. The talent, the intelligence that he brings to bear on his music. The fact that he's always looking for something new. And if you look at modern pop music today, I don't know who's doing that. All of the music starts to sound alike when you use sampling and you use auto-tune and things like that. And we are losing something because of that. So I hope that at some point there's a movement away from that in music. 3 Shades of Blue. Kind of Blue. That's the best there is. Thank you for joining me here at Music with Mascots, and I hope to see you again in the future. Thank you very much.